Hands up if you're tired of promoting your podcast all over social media, but without the rewards you expected. My guest today has been very vocal on her own show about giving up the social media hustle for listeners, and she's going to share how she has been growing her podcast without making copious reels, stories, and posts. Rosemarie Callender is the host of the Podcast Amplify show, podcasting tips for women coaches, service providers, and entrepreneurs. In this episode, you're going to hear what led Rosemarie to quitting Instagram and how she has increased her listenership instead. You're going to hear about her OCL framework and what simple steps you can start taking today to get your podcast into the right ears and more of them. Just a heads up, we recorded this while I was spending a week away in a holiday home, and the internet was dodgy in every room except the big living space with the high ceilings and single glazed windows, which is where I ended up having to record from. There is a lot to take in, so please do check out the show notes afterwards. This is Women Who Podcast, and I'm your host, Alison Fraser. Let's get into it. Welcome on to Women Who Podcast, Rosemarie Callender. So excited to have you on.
Yay! Thank you, Alison. This has been on the calendar for so long. Calendar. I couldn't help myself. But yeah, really, really excited to be here with you and to chat all things podcast growth, visibility, all the things. So let's get into it.
Yeah, let's get into it. So I have been listening to your show for quite a while. I love the way that you present your show. But what really got me noticing you is how you talked about not using social media to promote your podcast. So I'd love to dive into that today.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Because I don't know about many other people. I mean, I saw this on Threads. I think it was you posted it yourself about getting off socials this year, like how it's not a priority to be on it. And I'm so feeling that way too.
Yeah, you and a lot of other people that I've spoken to. So, but it's been a journey for me. I am coming up to 4 years in business in September 2024. And I've never really enjoyed social media from the very, very beginning of my business. I had profiles on all the accounts, so Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, but never really used them. But when I came into the online space, as you probably still hear that message now, you have to be on social media to grow your business. And so over time, I think in the first year, I was in all the places except Twitter. And then going into the second year, I was like, right, I'm just going to focus on Instagram, LinkedIn, I'll cross post. And even that got a bit much. And so then going into the second year, I dropped LinkedIn entirely. Facebook was more like groups, like podcast groups or groups that came as part of, a thing that I bought or a program that I was part of. So I spent a lot of time focusing on Instagram. Year 2, year 3, which is kind of where we are now. And I was realizing a pattern of burnout. I was having burnout. It felt like every other month. Realistically, it was probably every once a quarter or so. And I personally believe a big part of that was Instagram. I joke that Instagram is like 4 social media platforms in one because you've got the reels, you've got carousels, you've got posts, lives, there's stories, there's so much stuff going on one platform. And so I kept going. I bought content course after content course, Instagram course, trying to like find the secret sauce to attracting my dream clients on Instagram. And yeah, I didn't really get very far, to be honest with you. And then about a year ago, so like summer 2023, I went home for a holiday and I was like, right, I'm done. But I felt scared to talk about it because so many of the other people were saying that you had to be on social media, you had to show up on Instagram. And so I did. I recorded an episode. I took like most of September off, part of October off Instagram entirely. And oh my goodness, it was amazing. So I will admit that, I didn't get an onslaught of clients, but it was definitely a very productive month in my business. I got a lot of stuff done. My brain felt clear, it just felt so much better. I started up my email list and replacement, and it just felt a lot more aligned. Recorded, some episodes sharing my journey for my podcast, and yeah, everything's just kind of happened from there. So I went into 2024 deciding that I was done. I was done marketing my business on Instagram. I've never really got a client from Instagram. All my clients come from, guesting on podcasts, my own podcast, or client referrals. And so I was just kind of fed up of spending all this time doing, doing all the things, listening to everything that everyone else was saying and not seeing any sort of results. So, yeah, it's been 6 months. I've gone all in, but a bit of a plot twist, which is how you and I connected, Alison. I have been spending a lot of time on Threads. I know I never would have seen this coming, but Christmas 2023, I was clearing out some apps on my phone and I came across the Threads app, which I'd forgotten about. It came out in the summer of 2023, and I went over, created my profile, and kind of forgot about it again. I was like, nope, I'm not in a headspace for another platform. But with the decision to like leave Instagram, show up when it felt good, all that kind of stuff, I kind of like started exploring Threads, and it's actually a really, really good place to hang out. It's been very productive, very positive in terms of collaborating with other people. A lot of people have, tuned into the podcast without me directly promoting it on Threads. And so that has been a very interesting addition to my promotion strategy, but not really promoting strategy. But yeah, so that's kind of the story. And so as we record in June 2024, yeah, I show up on Instagram, I show up on stories. If I'm part of a summit or a bundle, then, part of the promo requirements are that you share a post or two. And so I'll do that. Or if I'm a guest on someone's podcast and they share their reel with me, I'll share that to my feed. But I generally have my 9 grid up and I show up on my stories if and when I feel like it, but I predominantly hang out on Threads. So
Do
yeah, so
you
that's the journey.
there's quite some journey.
Yeah.
Do you find that having removed all those social platforms that you've created space, like I'm going to say created space, people use that quite loosely, but you've got less clutter going on and you've been able to put more focus on to your podcast and to your business because you're not thinking, oh, what
Yeah.
reel do I produce today?
Oh, yeah. So my 9 grid has been up since January 2023. So that's been up for a while. It's actually due a refresh. But yes, to your question, mentally, there is this level of freedom. Instagram, specifically, I've found to be quite toxic in that I would go onto that platform in a really good mood, and there's some really good coaches that have some like really, really good messaging. And just like that, you're questioning everything, right? Or I don't follow anyone that does what I do, and I do that intentionally because my comparisonitis is off the charts. But someone just needs to say something. And whilst I'm a very confident person and I know that I'm really good at what I do, those messages, don't do this, do that, you're doing this wrong. Like some people's messaging is so good. It really had an impact on me and how I showed up. And so from that point of view, yes, I definitely feel free. I don't feel like I have all this mental clutter. Even when I go onto Instagram now, I probably scroll 2 scrolls of my feed and then I get bored. And then I'll go to stories and connect, see what my ex-clients are up to, what my current clients are up to, some of my favorite people. But that is literally it. I treat Instagram a bit like WhatsApp. So because Threads doesn't have a DM feature, I get a lot of people DMing me over there or people commenting on my stories. But there is a huge element that has been there's a pressure that's been lifted having made that decision. And yes, the other piece of that, because as I mentioned, it was around September, October, I decided, right, that month off, that 30 days felt really good. Can I do this longer term? And whilst it was an easy decision to be like, oh, nope, I'm not marketing my business on Instagram anymore, I then had this moment of, oh crap, well, what about the podcast? So a byproduct in a way of that decision has been really focusing on growing my podcast. And that has opened up a new offer, new messaging, like so much more. So it has been a good move in that way, 100%.
I'm
And
here.
there is Canva as well. I
Yeah.
still pay for Canva. I have moments where I think I should really cancel this. And then I thought, no. Like I still need it for presentations and like the odd graphic. But yeah, not having to be in Canva faffing with graphics and story templates and all that kind of stuff definitely is a dream come true for me.
Yeah. I hear quite a few people who are thinking about podcasting or people who are at the start of their podcasting talking about how they have to be on all the different social platforms so they can promote their podcast.
Yeah.
You have made the reverse decision. So the big question then is, how do you promote your podcast without being on social media?
Yeah, so there's other strategies that I use, three different strategies. They're probably more for established podcasts, or at least the third one is. So I'll dive into those in a minute, but I do want to address the point that you made in terms of, yes, there is this messaging, especially like the bigger name podcast experts who do what I do. There's this emphasis on, I might see a question in a podcast Facebook group. How do I grow my podcast? And 100% of the time, show up on social media. Show up on social media. And I'm like, oh my God, but that's so draining. But everyone is a little bit different. I don't have the capacity nor the inclination, if I'm totally honest with you, to show up in lots of different places. Like I recorded an episode on my podcast where, I talked about the 3-2-1 repurposing strategy. It's probably about a year old. And that's literally taking your podcast episode and repurposing it in, three Instagram posts, two written formats. So your show notes, a LinkedIn article. And then I can't remember, I think number one, the first one was like your email list. And that's like the very basic way of repurposing. But depending on the individual, depending on if it's just you, if you have a team, right? There's so many different factors. I'm more of the belief of what can I do to get in front of my ideal client that doesn't require me to spend a lot of time. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm against repurposing, and I've got a ton of like guest interviews, a ton of transcripts that, at some point in the very near future, I could hire someone like Feli, my girl Feli over on Threads. She's a repurposing expert. They'll be like, Feli, I need you to give me content ideas for that, right? That is in the cards. But me right now, I just don't have the capacity. My personal life at the moment has thrown up some things that I didn't anticipate. And so I've had to be really, really realistic with what I can do, right? But that doesn't mean that repurposing isn't for someone else. But for me personally, to directly answer your question, I prefer to focus on three different things. It's what I call the OCL framework, and this was born, it's relatively new, but born this year. I've done lots of testing, tweaking with my own podcast, with my management clients as well. And it's really around three different principles or pillars. So the O is around organic discoverability, which in simple terms is podcast SEO, and we'll dig into what that is in a moment. The C is collaborations. So you and I, you inviting me to talk about this topic on your podcast, that's a way of us collaborating. It's the most popular way that business owners, tap into to get in front of their ideal audience. But there's so many other different ways that podcasters can collaborate with other podcasters. And then the L is listener retention and engagement. So something that I had to have a really serious talk with myself. You want to grow, 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 but what about the listeners that are already like tuning in? Like, how can you ensure that they, engaging with you, they're getting value from your episodes, that when they find your podcast, they listen to, you've got 150 episodes in the can now. How can you get them to go back and binge the others, right? Go back a year ago, go back 2 years ago. So there's that piece as well. So that's the OCL framework that I've come up with myself this year to kind of really help me to see consistent podcast growth. And I really want to make it clear that I don't have 100,000 downloads. I don't have 1 million downloads. What matters to me is seeing listeners tuning in every day. Because for the first 2.5 years of podcasting, there were days in the week where no one was listening. And I know we'll have at least one person listening to this right now. And that can feel like a gut punch. That can feel like, oh my goodness, I am showing up. I know my content is good. How can I get this in front of more people? It can feel frustrating. And I've been there too. And so this framework, taking like little steps every single month, help me and help my clients to, see consistent growth every month. And I can't remember the statistic. I think it's something like 2 or 3%. We want to aim for 2 or 3% growth every month. And I know a lot of people look at downloads. I prefer to look at listeners because they're people, right? They're individuals, and downloads are all a little bit, they've got better since Apple Podcasts shifted and they turned off their auto downloads feature, but still they're not 100% accurate for me. So I'd rather look at listeners. And it's been really exciting, encouraging to see people tuning in every day since implementing this framework. Like I'm talking about 20, 30 listeners Monday through Sunday. Whereas, just a few short months ago, that wasn't the case. Sunday, I was guaranteed not to have anyone listening to my podcast. I want to see people listening every single day.
And I just want to go back to that. You're talking about 30 people listening to, every day. And so for some people, that might be, 30 is that's not very many people. But I always like to think of it as if I'm in a room and there's 30 people coming every single day to listen to me, then that's pretty cool.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. The other thing that I think about, my podcast is a client acquisition tool. So I use it. It's my primary marketing and sales tool in my business. It has been for the last 18 months now. As I mentioned before, a lot of my clients come from my podcast, or they might hear me on someone else's podcast. I always, use my podcast as a call to action. They tune in. And then when they're ready, they reach out and they say, Instagram DMs usually, I just binge your podcast. I loved what you said about XYZ. How do I work with you in whatever container? So for me, listeners, people are more important. Yes, I can say I got 10,000 downloads this month and not a soul has paid me for, the transformation that they're looking for. For me, that's not important. That's not relevant. And it's all about the goals that you set. So how do you want your podcast to support your business, right? And I want my podcast to support my business in 2 ways: getting me clients and getting me speaking opportunities. And it serves my business in that way. And it has done for 18 months. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. Some people might be listening and thinking, oh, 20, 30 people. Like, oh, that's nothing. Like I have a client who gets like 2,000. When we're about to hit 2,000 downloads a month, right? And that's all well and gravy. She does monetize, but I don't look at her or any of my other clients and compare it because I know what their goals are. So yes, there's the party element, but at the same time, 10K downloads, 10K followers, 10K email subscribers, they're all vanity metrics. If they're not helping, if having those numbers aren't really helping you see results in your business, like what is the point, So that's the other side of it for me as well. But yeah, a good point in terms of, we can, rent a room, have a party, and it's small enough for for us, if I was to invite those 30 people into like a party or an event of some kind, I could speak to them one to one and get to know them. And to me, that's more important than having, I don't even know, 500 listeners a day. I don't know what the numbers are because most people talk about download numbers as opposed to listeners. I want it to be more a human experience. I
Yeah.
create my podcast content for humans. I don't create my podcast content to see random numbers that don't really mean anything to the growth of my business. So that's the piece that's really, really important and something for our listeners to take away as well.
Yeah, definitely a great reminder to treat the people who are listening to your podcast as human beings and
Yeah.
not just a number, a metric to see your numbers go up.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So the first step was organic. So you talked about SEO. So I'm guessing that's what, naming your episodes something that people will be
Yeah.
searching for.
Yes. So organic discoverability means people are finding you, well, in my world anyway, people are finding you by themselves. And the reason why, and I'm going to record an episode about this soon. I believe that the advice around, leveraging social media to grow your podcast is a bit outdated, especially Instagram. The algorithm is just not showing your posts to anyone anymore, if they ever did, not when I was using it. But I just don't feel as though social media users, they go on social media to be social, to be entertained. They just want that quick 5-10 second reel, kiki kaka, scroll to the next thing, right? They're not intentionally looking to solve their problem in terms of a podcast. Whereas podcast listeners intentionally choose to listen to podcasts. That's their thing. And so I firmly believe, and this is not my original thought. I shared this on a podcast yesterday. This is not my original thought, but this was definitely the aha moment that helped me to see things in a different way. Podcast listeners choose to listen to podcasts. So why not go where they're already hanging out, right? It's almost like, and I saw this example recently, you go to the movies and I always try and get there just before the movie starts because the trailers beforehand really bug me. They show like 15, 20 minutes worth of trailers of new movies coming out. But it's only when I read this blog post and he used this example, I was like, oh my goodness, you're right. People come to the movies to watch the movie. So why not show them what's coming out whilst they're waiting for their movie to be shown? Does that make sense?
It
So
does.
the
And how
same
many
with,
times you then like, oh, I want
right?
to see that one.
Exactly. So in a way, it's the same sort of concept in terms of podcast listeners. So to use myself as an example, when I really wanted to start learning more about SEO, I went to Apple Podcasts. I didn't go to Instagram. I'm not really a YouTube person. You're either audio or video. Very, very few people are both, right? I'm an audio person. So I pulled up Apple Podcasts, which is where I listen to podcasts, and I typed in SEO. And then I thought, no, simple. I need this, like, talk to me like I'm two, right? So I put in simple SEO because historically, just hearing the word gave me anxiety. So I put in simple SEO and a bunch of podcasts came up, but there was one based on her cover art, based on her photo. There was so many different factors. I thought she's the one. And the name of her podcast was Simple SEO and Marketing. It just spoke to me. The name of her podcast spoke to me. Her cover art, the visuals was doing its thing. I loved her photo. Her name's Faith Hanan. So I clicked on it and I've been a loyal listener ever since, right?
Yeah.
You need to think about your podcast listeners in the same way. So what keywords are they likely to put into Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that they listen to podcasts? Think about what those are. If you don't know, ask your audience, ask your clients, stick a story up on Instagram. Like, what would you search if you were looking for a podcast that teaches XYZ? And trickle those keywords in your podcast name, in your podcast titles, in your podcast description, even your author name. So there's a place in your podcast host where you would put your name as the author. If you were to look at my podcast, you'll see that after my name, I've got, what have I got? I think I've got podcast launch strategist. I think at one point I had podcast coach, and I've been told by clients who found my podcast that they've put in podcast strategist, right? So you need to
Yeah.
think about, so if you're a business coach for moms, you should put that in after your name. Just put a bit of a line after your name, business coach for moms. There's like 4 or 5 different places that are searchable, but the most powerful one is your podcast name. So if you like Faith, simple SEO and marketing, it says it all. I put in simple SEO, and I think she was either number 1 or number 2. She was definitely in the top 3 results. And she was just it, right? So that's the first bit, just using keywords. And then once you've launched, using them in your episode titles as much as possible as well. So that's the organic discoverability piece. And then collaborations. We talked about podcast guesting being one of them. A few things that I've tapped into. Again, I'm testing and tweaking podcast intro swaps. So this is something that I've learned from my mentor, Adam, can't pronounce his surname, Schwable, the podcasting business school. He talks about podcast intro swaps, which is literally you recording a 30-second intro about your podcast, swapping that intro with someone else who has an audience. So you complement each other. You have similar audiences. You're at a similar place in your journey. So like if you're a top 10% podcast, maybe not swap with a top 1%. Like you kind of want to be in the same place. You swap
like
those
for like.
intros. Yeah, like for like, exactly. But you want to make sure, as with any collaboration, that your audience aligns. There's really no point in you getting in front of the wrong audience because you won't see results. But as I mentioned, it's like a 30-second intro. You record one, they record one, you swap, you each put that intro right at the beginning of your podcast episode. And as Adam describes it, it's almost like a pattern disrupt, right? Because people who, your loyal listeners, are used to how you start your podcast episodes. So if you're a guy like Adam, for example, and he sometimes swaps for a woman, and they hear this female voice at the beginning of his episodes, they're going, huh? What's this? Right? And rather
Checking
than
I've got the
skip,
right show
yeah,
on.
have I got the right show? Yeah, yeah, okay, yeah, I am in the right place. Who is this? What they're saying, right? They're more likely to listen rather than skip, because a lot of our loyal listeners will skip the beginning to get to the crux of the conversation of the episode. So that's a really good way. I've done that twice now. I'm seeing some really good results. Summits, if you speak at summits using a QR code to as part of your presentation, is a good way so that they can just scan the QR code and find your podcast. The same if you take, I've done quite a few bundles where I've hosted a bundle and the podcast has been a sponsor of the bundle, or I'm a contributor and I just mention the podcast in various places, or maybe I'll share a playlist and I'll use, I'll pull together episodes from my podcast for that playlist. So I'm all about low lift. I'm not, nearly 4 years in business with multiple bouts of burnout. I want to recreate, not recreate, I don't want to recreate. I want to repurpose stuff that I've already done, stuff that feels good. It's really easy for me to sit behind a mic and, record a quick episode or pull together episodes I've already created into a playlist and, do a quick landing page and Bob's your uncle, we're done, right?
Yeah.
So you just kind of need to think about how do you collaborate as a business owner? And how can you bring the podcast into that to get it in front of your right fit people where they're already kind of interested in you, interested in your content, as opposed to, this is where the social media versus podcasting argument comes into play for me. Because I feel like social media is very much, hey, I'm over here. Come see my post, maybe listen to my episode. Whereas when they're already looking for your podcast content, you just need to put it in front of them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's making it easy for them as well, because you mentioned,
Exactly.
the intros. So I've been listening to Dr. Michael Mosley's podcast quite recently,
Yeah.
Just One Thing. And yeah, they have other BBC Sounds podcasters,
Yes.
mentioning their podcast, at the end of an episode. And
Yes.
you're on the app, and then you're like, oh, I'm on my app, listen to this podcast. I can just look up that podcast right now.
Yeah.
Or if they're really clever, have a link to it in the show notes. That
Yes.
makes it super easy.
Super easy.
And the QR code, I mean, it's such an easy thing for listeners to just access. You're not making it
Yes.
hard for them. And I feel that sometimes, like on social, you're taking them off that platform, or you're wanting to
Yes.
take them off that platform. And they
You're
probably
wanting.
won't do that because, they're scrolling on Instagram. They're not going to go click the link in your bio or whatever you want them to do.
And that's not how Instagram has built their app, so you stay
Mm.
on the platform. And so it just goes against, and I don't know, I'm sure someone shared a book with me. I have yet to read it, but there is this thing between your brain and social media, but Instagram in specific, the way they want us to behave, we unconsciously behave in that way. And something that I haven't really spoken about this a lot, but there's definitely, I think people who have big audiences before they launch see faster growth. I'm not saying this to anyone who's listening, who's thinking of starting. I don't want this to put you off because a podcast can help you grow your audience as well. But I think something that I've seen a lot with past clients, and I'm always kind of like, I scroll myself on threads and or a podcast Facebook group because I'm wanting to see what people are talking about, what's coming up. And there's definitely this big difference between, people, especially coaches who already have an existing audience, who could get away with maybe a little bit of winging it and seeing faster growth versus someone who, just say a big and engaged audience. That's the big piece, the
Yeah.
engaged piece. The people who, I've worked for a couple clients who they could probably drop a story that, they're doing the most mundane thing but their audience are really going to lap it up because they've taken that time to grow that community on whatever platform that they're on. But for most of us, including myself, we are using our podcast to, scale our visibility, grow our audience, but just be mindful that social media is not really going to support us, or it's just going to feel like a longer slog. It's going to feel like a hard road. And that's what I wanted to come away with because podcasting is meant to be fun. It's not meant to feel this hard. And I'd rather put some work in up front. So I'd rather spend some time thinking about what keywords I can use, knowing that people are going to find that one episode for months and years to come, rather than creating audiograms and reels that a handful of people are going to see and potentially not take action on because
And
as you
then,
said, they don't necessarily click.
yeah, and then they're just gone, aren't they? Like
And then they're
once
just
you,
gone
like they last, what, a
within
day?
day. Yeah. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And so I get
No.
quite aggravated when I see, I will not name them, but when I see some of the big podcast experts saying, 3 ways to grow your podcast. And number one and number two is post on social media. I'm like, who's got time? That just feels like a never ending like cycle. I just feel like you're gonna keep posting and you're just not gonna see the results. And I kept quiet about this for so long, but now that I'm more vocal about it, I'm having more conversations like you and I are, or it's what potential clients are saying to me that they're really resonating with. Like I've got this really good promotion plan and I'm just not seeing any growth. And I'm like, well, yeah, because it's social media. People are there to be social. I mean, Threads just does feel like a different ball game. Like I never say new episodes. And click the link to it. No, I don't do that anymore. But I feel like people on my friends, I feel like they just go down the link in bio route. And so if you've got your podcast linked in your sort of link tree type thing, they're more likely to click it. I've definitely seen growth this year from that.
Mm.
But you just need to work out what's working for you. I think that's the key bit. For the people that I'm working with, that I'm talking to, they're just over social media,
Yeah.
as am as am I.
I'm I'm sure there'll be many more who'll be listening going, actually, yeah, I
Yeah.
am too. I just wanted to go back to the
Yes.
SEO bit because you mentioned about naming your titles and, so
Hmm.
people can find them. And I just wanted to let listeners know that it's not something that you have to do right from the very beginning. And if your podcast is 3 years old, then that ship has sailed.
Yes.
You can go back and rename them, can't you?
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much, Alison. Yes, absolutely. So I am 3 years old. I was 3 years old 3 days ago, actually.
Happy birthday.
But thank you very much. But it was when I hit the 2 year mark, I had Danielle Gagnon on my podcast talking about podcast SEO, and it was because of her that I kind of went down this route. And yes, I kind of updated. I think I was doing 5 to 10 episodes a month. And within 2 weeks of me doing that, just going in, looking at the episode, what is this about? Looking at the transcript, rewriting the title, including those keywords, I doubled my down again. I don't really look at downloads, but at the time, doubled my downloads. And so that was like, oh, that worked well. Oh, okay. How do I do more of that? And so part of like what I do every quarter is kind of looking to see what episodes haven't been listened to. And I might look at the overall numbers and see if there's a way that I could retitle it. So switch up the title a little bit. So yes, if you're 1 year in, 2, 3, even maybe 6 months, you can just go back and look at them and see which ones can I easily incorporate a keyword and switch them up. There's this tool called CoSchedule by Headliner, and I can share the link with you, Alison, that I use to help me with
That would be great.
titles. It helps you with titles for a lot of stuff. So podcast, blog, what else? Email. It does a YouTube. It does quite a
Newsletters,
variety.
yeah.
Yeah, all the things. But essentially, you just pop the name that you came up with into the, search function, and then it will score you from 1 to 100, how good that title is. And I think it's 70 and up. Yeah, I think it's 70 and up. I think below 50 is red. 50 to 70 is yellow. 70 to 100 is green. So you definitely want the green. But what I love more about it is that you can then, I think it's an AI type function. You can click this suggests, how can I improve this title? Click on that and it will give you different ways to improve it. There's like 5 or 7 different things that you can click on. And then when you click on the new title, it will rate you again. So you can kind of use that to, I say perfect, but I don't want people to literally take that as I must get this perfect. We just want to get it to like in the green zone. So 70% and over. And then it also tells you SEO. So it will tell you how the title rates on an SEO. So if you want to put your show notes on your website, I haven't tested that out a lot, but it's definitely a feature that's worth looking into. I think I use a paid plan now, but I started out on free. So it's definitely worth looking at for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's something that you can just do little and often, isn't it? Just take a couple of episodes a
Yeah.
day or a
Yeah,
week.
or a month or whatever it might be. And I think the first place to start would be to come up with your keywords. So like for me, start a podcast is one, grow a podcast, how to grow a keywords or key phrases. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a word. Use Uber Suggest to kind of come up with other ideas. Sometimes I might put podcasting tips is a big one. So I might put podcasting tips in Google. And when you put a word, it then suggests other words. So I'll see what comes up. I'll see what questions are being answered through the people always also answer function on Google. There's lots of different ways, but don't guess what you think people are putting in because you are so close to your content that chances are you're getting it wrong. You're missing the boat completely. So if you've got clients or if you've got a community, like I'm working with a client, we've just kicked off our coaching program. I'm actually in her membership. So I said to her, asking the membership, asking Slack what they would search for if they were looking for, your podcast. And so people have jumped on, I've taken a screenshot, and we're going to incorporate what they've said in her podcast, new podcast name and her podcast description. So please don't guess. This is for anything with your podcast content. Don't try and guess what people want to hear. The easiest way to find podcast content ideas is just ask your people. Look at your intake forms, look at what they're asking in the DMs, comments on your post, anything really. But yeah, just make it really, really easy for you.
And if you're asking the people that are already listening to your podcast or will be listening to your podcast, then that is going to mean that people just like them who maybe are about to look for your podcast, they will find it so much. Yeah, they're going to be typing in the same kinds of words, aren't they?
Exactly. That's why we want to go directly to, hear it from the horse's mouth. So for better word.
So we've covered organic and we've covered collab a bit, to a degree. Should we go into L of your framework?
So L is listener retention and engagement. So I think I touched on this earlier, where I think a lot of business owners or podcasters in general focus on more and more and more. That's probably across the business sphere, to be fair. I want more clients. I want more money. I want more, right? But in terms of the podcast, and I'm guilty of this, I was like, I want to grow. When I decided that I was going to move away from social media, I want to grow the podcast. And then I thought, well, Rosemarie, what about the people already listening? Like, it'll be good to engage with them more, for them to find similar content. And so something that it hasn't been long, but something that I'm definitely testing out is using a very popular blog strategy, but for my podcast. So to the point I mentioned earlier about, limited time, I have put in show notes on my podcast for now, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to leverage some of the strategy. So there's this one strategy. So if you're familiar with blogs, a good blog right down the bottom will have something along the lines of, I think it's related post or related blog posts, and people will usually link 2, 3 different different blog posts related to the blog post that you've just read. Does that make sense, Alison? Are you familiar with that concept?
It does make, I'm familiar with that. It does make total sense because they're all kind of connected, aren't they? Like,
yes. And obviously
I'm trying to think of a topic, but I can't think of one off the top of my head, which is just typical.
But no, once that makes sense, because sometimes I think I'm explaining something and I'm like, does this make sense to someone else other than myself? So once the concept makes sense, but the same. But with blogs, it's kind of a way, internal linking is a big part, an important part of your SEO strategy. So that's not quite the same in terms of podcasts, but for that listener retention piece, especially newer listeners, how can I get them to, say that, especially now that I'm pivoting into podcast growth now, how can I get them to listen to other episodes that are relevant to podcast growth that I might have recorded last year, but are still like really relevant? And so I'm taking that blog strategy, and in the episode description, so within the podcast player apps, I am linking that episode. So I would I still new, so I'll let you know at the end of the year how that has worked, but I'm trying to link at least one. If I don't mention it naturally in the episode, then I'm definitely linking at least 2. The thing that I'm trying to navigate and find a solution for is, because if I had show notes on my website, I would of course use that link, right? The link from the show notes page. But because I don't, I've seen other people do this and they're using the Apple Podcast link. And I feel like that's a bad move. Yes, most of my listeners are from Apple Podcasts, but number 2 is Spotify. And so if I only use the Apple Podcast link, then I'm losing out on my Spotify or Android like users, right? And so at the moment, I use Captivate as my podcast host, and it's really easy to grab an episode link, a link for each episode in Captivate. This does mean that it comes up as a player for that episode, which is going to take them away from their listening app. But that's kind of where I've settled at the moment. So that's something that I'm testing to kind of get, especially new listeners. Oh, you love this episode, you're gonna love these other two as well. Right. But yeah, that's a strategy that I've kind of stolen from our lovely bloggers. And I can definitely keep you posted to see how that works. And then listener engagement, I'm still thinking this through. I tried to launch a community for my podcast listeners last summer, and that didn't really take off. And I think that's because a lot of people, they like where they are. So as much as the people complain about Facebook, they prefer a Facebook group over Circle or Slack. I mean, this community was in Telegram, but it's just, and I've seen people talk about this on Threads. They don't want to log into yet another thing. So
Yeah,
I'm
I
still
hear
trying to
that.
work out because I would love to, like, I think before we hit record, or maybe it was during the episode, you talked about how much you love my podcast, and I love connecting with people. Like, I posted something the other day in a Facebook group, and someone whose email list I've been on for yonks was like, "Oh my God, I love your podcast." I'm like, "Huh? You listen?" Like, I had no idea. So I would love to have that, engagement. It can sometimes feel one-sided, like, you're talking to this mic, people listen, clients come, or you'll get the odd DM or email. But I'd definitely love to connect more with my listeners. I just haven't figured out yet how to do that. But I know that I don't want it to be on social media, which is the block, right? Because as much as people don't want to be on social media, it's what they're accustomed to. But I don't want to be on social media. So I guess for our listeners, if there's something that works for you personally, definitely explore it. But for me personally, I haven't quite worked out what that engagement strategy is.
Yeah, it's finding, yeah, it's knowing where the people are, but people are in all kinds of different spaces and it's
They
getting
are.
them all to be in the same space. That's probably the
Yes. Or
problem.
at least the majority to be in the same space.
Yeah.
And yeah, I probably could have talked about the Telegram group a lot more, but I think after like 6 or 8 weeks, no one had joined except like a couple of my clients, bless them, to show their support. And then I thought, okay, this, and I think I saw someone else post something similar, and all the comments were like, I would love to, but the thought of like logging into something, another app, just isn't enough of an incentive for me. And I was like, oh, okay. So that might be the reason why no one's like jumped on this, because I was super,
Mm.
super excited. But yeah, I'm hoping that, I have an aha moment, as I do sometimes in the middle of the night. That will be the solution. But yeah, just kind of always think, I think the biggest thing around this L piece of the framework is not forgetting your current listeners. That's the biggest takeaway. Not
Mm.
always, I want more and more and more, making sure that you are serving and keeping your current listeners happy.
Yes, because they've been there from, well, some of them have been there from the start.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I joined a podcast community on Slack.
Mm,
Um, I'm not sure how I feel about Slack
mm.
because it does seem to get quite chaotic in that if you don't log in for a couple of days, conversations have moved on at such a pace that you have no idea what's going on.
Yes. Slack is definitely, I think, are we in the same podcast community? Podcast, what is it called? The one from Mom.
This No, this
No?
one it's actually a podcast. It's the Drunklander podcast. It's
Ah,
an Outlander podcast.
right. Okay.
So
And
it's
they've
for their
created a
listeners.
space. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Slack is, I mean, I like Slack. I use Slack for like my podcast challenges and a couple memberships. But yeah, I know what you mean. And, keeping things in the thread. Sometimes people respond outside of the thread, and then it gets really messy. But yeah, I don't know. I thought Telegram is similar to Voxer. or WhatsApp. If you're not familiar with it, you can send voice notes, you can use written text, but again, it's just another platform. And I don't
Mm.
think, as much as they don't like social media, I don't think they're also not ready to move on to something else. And I get
Mm.
that, because if I join something and it's on Circle, that's a done. I'm done. Like I can't Circle. What's the others? Circle, Heartbeat, Mighty
Mighty
Network.
Network,
There's about four or five, and as soon as I click the
Discord.
button, Discord, I'm just like, oh no, I want to. So I get it. So I can't even like complain about like my audience not taking action, because I am that person for other people. But yeah, I think I might just need to let it sit for a while. And usually when I let things sit, the solution just appears. But yeah, but I'm still keeping in my mind that I need to keep them in mind. So when I'm recording my content, doing what I can in episode descriptions, telling them to connect with me over on Instagram or Threads, or send me an email, which is a bit more personal. So I'm making those invitations in the meantime.
Mm. Can we go back to you've been talking about going off socials for a while. You've had lots of people who have connected with you
Mm,
because of all this, and you've got your framework on how you can grow like with SEO and without social media.
yeah.
You're now helping other podcasters do the similar thing that you've done, aren't you, with your framework?
Right, yes. And so that's where my podcast growth amplifier program came along. And it's interesting because I feel as though once I really leaned into not dissing Instagram, although sometimes it can come across that way, but really speaking my truth and how I felt about Instagram. We didn't really go deeply, but I do believe there was a period of time where I was addicted to Instagram. Like, I'd wake up in the morning, it was before I even walk the dog at 6:30, 7 a.m. I'm looking, I've, opened the phone, looking at Instagram. It was crazy. I'm checking constantly throughout the day. So there was that addiction piece for quite a period of time. And now that I've really started to talk about, stepping away from Instagram, especially on Threads, I'm attracting people who really resonate with that message. And it's so funny because I shied away from sharing that for so long, and now I'm speaking my truth in a way. And it's coming up a lot in podcast episodes, that, guest appearances. It's coming up in the DMs. It's coming up on my discovery calls. And so I thought, right, there's definitely something here. I'm not alone in this. And so, I spent the first part of the year, probably January till April, May, testing out certain things. I ran a podcast growth challenge a couple times, and clients have got results from that. And so I thought, I need to package this up properly. And yeah, so just a couple of weeks ago, I wouldn't say the word launch. I was just like, hey, here we are. I didn't do a huge launch because I'm too tired to do a huge launch. But yes, I kind of just put it out there to past clients. I did some market research, and a couple people put their hands up as a result of those calls. And yeah, so I've onboarded two. Now we're at two. And it's like a 4-month coaching program, one-on-one. But for the first month, it's very much, I believe in looking at where you've been so that we can figure out where you're going. So there is a bit of done for you. So I'll do your podcast audit. We'll jump on it. If you didn't work with me before, if you haven't, use my impact framework, then we'll do a strategy call to make sure your foundational stuff is in place. And then we'll create your growth plan. And then for 3 months, once a month, we'll meet, track progress against the growth plan. I'll help you map out your content, all the kind of things like that. And it's built on the framework that we talked about before, which is the OCL framework. And it's very much going to be, because I believe that, and not enough people talk about this, but marketing, we should market to our strengths. So, thinking about Instagram again, I spent so long flogging that horse. And I didn't enjoy it. It's definitely not a strength. Like, pointing and dancing, I've been there too. And,
I
whilst I
hate that.
pretended, yeah, whilst I pretended that I loved it, I really didn't. Inside, I was crying and dying slowly. Right? And so a big part of this program is, yes, I have a list of strategies that come under the OCL framework, which ones light you up, which ones feel good. And then we'll just create your growth plan from that. I'll keep you accountable. There's 20, not 24/7 because the girls got to sleep, but Voxer support for any questions. So, it's done for you for the first month and then very much coaching thereafter. And the aim is for business owners, coaches, service providers to start seeing some growth. So the two women that I'm working with presently, they're sort of just feeling a bit, you know, frustrated. They haven't seen growth. Consistency has been a bit hodgepodge because of that. There's so many different factors that come into it when you're not seeing the results that you want to see. They're not, getting clients from their podcast, and that's when my launch framework comes in. So there's lots of different pieces that I'm pulling together. So I'm really, really excited to work with them over the summer. And of course, I'll be updating threads as we go along. But what I have learned so my sort of gift to the women that did the market research calls for me was to do a mini audit of their podcast. Well, that turned into like a full, because I don't do halves, but that turned into more of a mid audit rather than a mini. But what struck me as really interesting is four of those five women, the Loom videos that I was creating were all literally the same feedback. Like, your podcast name is too small, your cover art, like, that black background. We really want to use colors that pop. Your podcast description is too short. Like, who are you talking to? Your podcast name doesn't tell me what your podcast is about. I was repeating the same kind of stuff. And so I found that really interesting, in that I think that a lot of people who, even in the online business space, think that they're struggling with things alone, that it's just them, when actually I guarantee you there's 500,000 other people who are
Hmm.
struggling with the same thing. And I'm a strategist first and foremost. Everything that I teach, everything that I support my clients with is baked in strategy. And I firmly believe that with the right strategy, you'll see the results. And so some people just need a few tweaks to start seeing a little bit of movement with their numbers, listener numbers, consumption numbers, whatever numbers they're looking at, rather than an entire overhaul. Yes, there are some people that might need a rebrand, but my biggest takeaway from those audits were, you just need to tweak this. Who is this for? Like, this is not clear to me. So yeah, that was kind of my biggest takeaway, and sort of reinforcement that my offer was a good one, because I think it's really needed in the podcasting space. Like, I think, and I was this person, a lot of people know how to teach you how to launch a podcast or help you launch a podcast, right? A small amount of those people can teach you how to launch a podcast that monetizes your services and digital products, like myself. And then there's another even smaller bunch of people who can teach you how to grow. And so that's a space that I'm really excited to step into, off social
I'm
media,
excited for
especially.
you. Yeah, I'm excited for you, Rosemary, because
Thank you.
off social media is the best, because
Yeah,
so many people in this space are still pushing the get yourself on social media more.
they
And
are.
as we've already said, we're over that now.
And I mean, if you're listening to this and you love social media, like some of my clients, it's interesting because some of my launch clients, they come to me and they're like, in the intake form, yeah, I love when you talk about, not marketing and social media. And then we launch. And, my launch clients normally sign a client or land a speaking invitation from their podcast within 30 days of launching. And I'll keep up with them. I stalk them for all the months to come. I check in with them at 3, 6, 9, 12 months. And, even one in particular, I was like, I messaged her, you can calm down with the stories, right? Like, you can step away, because I know for a fact that your podcast is converting into your membership. But I think people are so used to showing up 50 times a day on Instagram specifically that it almost becomes second nature. And so, yes, she has started to slowly like come off. And I remember I saw her in Threads say that she's thinking about putting up a 9 grid. And I was like, what? I never thought that I would ever see or hear you say that. But I think for some people it works. But for a lot of us, alternatives that feel good are even better. And I'm one of those people. And I would love to support more women to embrace that approach.
You know what, Rosemary? I think we've covered so much
We
today
have.
that people can just start making tweaks to their podcast if they want to.
Yes.
I don't want to overwhelm them anymore because I'm already thinking of all the little things that I could
Is your brain
do
like,
to my own podcast. Yeah. And it's like, I want to do those things. I'm not going to do it right now
no,
because I'll let it just, just
let it
marinate.
sit. Yeah.
Where can listeners find you? Let's give a big plug to your podcast and all your places that we can find you, Rosemary.
Yeah, so of course you can find me. Number one spot is my podcast. It's the Podcast to Amplify show, available on all major listening platforms. If you wanted to drop me a DM, ask any follow-up questions, I'm over on Instagram at Too Busy to Podcast. And yeah, if you want to kind of hear my sometimes random thoughts, then I'm over on Threads, the same handle as Instagram.
And I'll put the links to those in the show notes.
Thank you.
People, if they're busy driving or out for a run, and don't have to remember those. Yeah.
No, and some of the things that I think all of the things that we've talked about, there will be episodes that you can kind of, binge listen and, get, like you were saying, Alison, there's so much more that we can talk about. This is just like the surface. But if you want to dig a bit deeper, head on over to the podcast and just kind of have a scroll through, see which episodes grab your attention, and yeah, tune in. A lot of my episodes are quite shortish, around like 20-25 minutes. So you're all good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for absolutely everything that we've covered today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was really excited about this interview, and yeah, it's been amazing to chat to you about this today.
Thanks again, Rosemary. So many actionable steps that we can all take to get our podcast found by the people we want to be listening. I've already started drawing up a list for my other show, Our Scotland, which is a travel show with a different. You can find links to Rosemary in the show notes. That's it for this episode. I will speak to you again soon.
You've been listening to Women Who Podcast, the podcast for women with something to say.